Marinero, the Sick Podcast, joining me tonight. Andrew Zadarnowski of Habs Eyes on the Prize. The topic, will the Canadiens make the playoffs if this is their team? As is, are they in or are they out? Andrew, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Tony, how about you? How are things going?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you. And of course, the Sick Podcast is brought to you by Essentia, the world's only natural memory foam mattress. Go to myessentia.com/sickpod. and use code SICKPOD for a free pillow with your purchase. Essentia Beyond Organic Sleep. All right. We have maybe about a month and a half sleep before hockey gets back to its regular season. Actually, it'll get back at the scheduled time, which is the first week of October for the regular season. That is, so a couple of months. So in a couple of months, the regular season starts, Andrew. And if the Montreal Canadiens, if this is their team and they don't add any players, does this team make the playoffs? Yes or no? That's what we're going to try and figure out. So let's take a look at, why don't we do things backwards and take a look at the Atlantic. Let's take a look at the Metropolitan. Let's take a look at other teams. We'll play the process of elimination game. And at that point, we'll see if the Montreal Canadiens have a better chance of being in or out. Are you good?
I'm good. Let's give her a try. Let's see what happens here.
All right. Okay. In the Atlantic, Boston, Tampa Bay, Toronto, Florida, Montreal, Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit. In the Metropolitan, Carolina, the New York Islanders, Pittsburgh, Washington, Philadelphia, Columbus, the New York Rangers, and New Jersey. We got that?
So far,
as you know,
so
of course, 8 teams in the East will make the playoffs. The Montreal Canadiens, as we speak, the lines can be anything, of course, but let's just say it sounds something like this. Suzuki in between Caulfield and Toffoli. Kotkaniemi in between Gallagher and Hoffman. Perreault with Anderson on his right and Drouin on his left. Evans with Armia on his right, Lehkonen on his left. You have Cedric Paquette, of course. You have Paul Byron, who's out with an injury and won't be able to start the season. And then on defense, Edmondson, Petrie, Sherratt, Savard. You have Romanov. You have Kulak. You have Weidman. And this is your Montreal Canadiens team. All right, so the lines, first of all. What are your lines?
Yeah, I was fairly close to yours. I think we can all agree that Toffoli, Suzuki, and Caulfield are going to be the top line for Montreal. I think Caulfield came as advertised in the playoffs. Really, there was very little doubt remaining as to whether he was NHL ready or not after a pretty long season playing in college and then at the AHL level, playing some international. There was no doubt in my mind that he is NHL ready to play, and he's going to be on the top line for Montreal. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see. I had Hoffman with Kotkaniemi and Anderson. I think they're going to give Kotkaniemi some solid wingers for a change. He's no longer going to be kind of in a bottom 6 role. I think they're going to try to give him a second line role here with some important minutes and some important wingers. And we're of course assuming that this is the lineup that's going to be going into the season. Of course, we always have that asterisk in this conversation. Where I struggled, I had bottom line. I had in fact, I had Ryan Poehling, Evans, and Armia. I'm going to go a little backwards here. I think Ryan Poehling is going to have a show me year here.
Yeah.
But for the third line, that's where things kind of get interesting because you start getting a lot of players that kind of start circling around there. You know, they have Cedric Paquette. They picked up Matthew Perreault. Problem with those guys is that they didn't really play much center last year. Matthew Perreault hasn't played center in a couple of years now. So to pencil him in for a center role, I think is kind of maybe setting him up for a difficult season. What I'm wondering, and this is just purely hypothetical, with Jonathan Drouin coming back healthy, motivated, and ready to be a participant on this team, will they try to do the Jonathan Drouin center experiment again, but in a third line role with Gallagher and Lehkonen as his wingers?
I don't see that happening, and I'm going to tell you why. If he found last season difficult, all right? Well, we know that his first year where they put him at center, he found it difficult. He didn't like it. Yes. They put him on the wing. If he found last season difficult and the struggles and the pressure that came with it, we all know that he needed some time away. don't you think that if they're going to give it another go, they're not going to do it with added responsibility? And playing center, it's a 200-foot game. It's added responsibility.
But you know why we're having this conversation right now? Because I think everyone's identified that there's still a hole at center. And so there's a lot of guessing going on as to who's going to be that player that's going to take that center role. And again, this conversation's with the asterisks that this is the lineup going in. And, Matthew Perreault, like I said, hasn't played center in a few years. Cedric Paquette, also with very low center minutes last season. Are they going to introduce him to a center role after not playing much at center last year? I mean, obviously they signed him for a reason. I want to hope that the reason isn't purely cynical because he's a francophone, but that they actually have a position in mind for him. And I don't know if that's going to be center either. So I think we've identified that there's a need for something to fill that center position. And it's going to be moving someone who hasn't played center, didn't play center last year. And that's, for me, Drouin is still part of that conversation, maybe in a different configuration than with Gallagher and Lehkonen. But I think, yes, you're correct that, how much pressure do they want to put on this guy? But if Jonathan Drouin says he's back, I think that the team must use him to his fullest potential and not protect him or protect any sort of regression in his recovery. Certainly, we're all happy that Drouin is back on the ice right now and back practicing on skates and seems to be based on that one picture that made social media this past week, he seems to be in good spirits, which is fantastic. But if the team is going to kind of just handle him with kid gloves, then I don't think it's the correct approach. If the team feels they need to handle him with kid gloves, then that won't use him to his fullest potential, and maybe they need to look to trade him out of town just so he can play somewhere to his fullest potential without the added stress of being a center in Montreal, let's say.
Andrew, I've had this discussion before. I mean, I don't see how it's going to work out for Jonathan Drouin long-term in Montreal. I mean, I wish him all the best. I hope for him that he's able to turn it around and prove everyone wrong that thinks that it won't work out long-term. But the only way I see it happening, Montreal is Montreal. The pressures that come with Montreal will always be the pressures that come with Montreal. The criticism will always be there. So, the only way I see it is either he's moved before the season starts, but if he's moved, everyone knows that there's no value in a trade. So that's not good for the Montreal Canadiens. So what would be good for the Montreal Canadiens is he gives it a go. He tries to produce. If he does produce at that point, they get his value up. He could be moved at that time. But for Jonathan Drouin to be in the best possible situation with less pressure, I think what he has to do, they got to put him on a third line. They got to put him on the wing, not at center. So there's less responsibility. On a third line, there's less responsibility to produce because he's not a top six guy at that point. There's no pressure. And you go out there, you go out against third lines on other teams. You go out against third pairing defensemen, and that's the best situation. I think with Josh Anderson on the opposite wing of him could open up some ice for him. Maybe he'll see Perreault at center ice. Maybe he'll see Jake Evans at one point. Maybe at one point, Kotkaniemi will be centering him, and maybe Perreault is on a second line for a very, very short term. Anyway, offense. Take a look at the team right now. They've added Mike Hoffman, of course, at the forward position. They've added Matthew Perreault. They've added Paquette that we talked about at the forward position. Is this team going to score more goals than last season? Is this a better offensive team than the team that we just saw go to the Stanley Cup final?
I want to say for the regular season, essentially you're replacing Thomas Tatar's 20 plus goals with Mike Hoffman's production. So I think that's 1-for-1 for the regular season. That's a wash. Phil Danault, we know that his offensive production has gone down, but the puck side support that he offers on the defensive side is the in question. But from a goals perspective, I don't think they'll be scoring more goals. They're going to require the younger guys to step up. So Suzuki, Caulfield, Kotkaniemi, all of them are going to have to score more goals than they did last season. We're going to have to see a bit more offensive input from Jake Evans. And I'm really curious to see how Ryan Poehling does. He will have an opportunity to play a few games with Paul Byron injured at the beginning of the season. He's going to start the season with Montreal. I'm curious to see how his game is going to translate to the NHL level. We know that he struggled in his sophomore year. Last season was much better for him, but he didn't play in the NHL. I'm curious to see this. This is kind of a prove it year for Ryan Poehling, and if he starts off strong, if he can kind of be the sort of the prove to be the same surprise as Jake Evans was last year, then I think the team will be solid enough. Will they score more goals than last year? Hard for me to tell. I think it's going to be a wash.
You can go to sportbuffshop.com for all of your officially licensed sports apparel and more. Use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items. If your favorite hockey team is the Montreal Canadiens, you can get some hoodies, you can get some jerseys, you can check it out there. All right, we're talking about offense. I think Hoffman and Tatar, I think it ends up being a wash as well. Danault leaves. He didn't put up big numbers, so that's not a big drop-off. Maybe Perreault can actually manufacture what Danault did. Caulfield is the X factor because he's going to be there for an entire season. I think there's a possibility that they do score more goals and that they actually have a better power play with Cole Caulfield and Mike Hoffman there. They lose Shea Weber, but the power play was not always great with Weber. You add Hoffman, you add Caulfield. I think the Canadiens have a better power play. Because of that, I think the Canadiens can score more goals. The penalty kill. Let's talk about that. This is the way I see it. Carey Price is coming off knee surgery. Paul Byron's not going to be there at the start of the season. And the Montreal Canadiens have lost Phil Danault and Shea Weber. The Canadiens' penalty kill will not be as good as last season. There's a drop-off right there.
And I would agree with you there. You basically identified a lot of key factors in how success and why the penalty kill was so successful in the playoffs for the Montreal Canadiens. There's a lot of key components being lost from the first wave of the penalty kill. Obviously, Jake Evans is going to have to step up big in the penalty kill. I think he's going to be one of the guys that is going to be given the most responsibilities. You still have Arturi Lehkonen, which does produce he's a very productive player on the penalty kill. We're not going to see the amount of shorthanded goals we saw this past season. That a lot of it was Paul Byron on breakaways, really. But I think you're correct. I think that the X factor for the penalty kill is going to be what Cedric Paquette and Matthew Perreault can bring to the Canadiens, and that in terms of the penalty kill. I think if they can be suitable replacements for Phil Danault, then it'll be okay. But for me, it's a big unknown as to what Cedric Paquette and Matthew Perreault can bring to the team.
Cedric Paquette, Matthew Perreault, David Savard, Good Chenu are happy to be home. If they want to throw a party, I tell them to call Sophistication Event Rentals, live music, DJ, sound systems, tents, chairs, tables, decor, lighting, photo booth, TV screens. The number to call in Montreal is 514-570-5770. It's your one-stop shop. All right. I'm going to go through some players, and you're going to understand why I will. Paul Byron, Jonathan Drouin, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Carey Price. Just to name a few. I have question marks next to all of them. Paul Byron, he's going to be out. He's a good depth player. I know he was on waivers 3 times last season, but once again, they're going to miss him on the penalty kill. Jonathan Drouin is a question mark. We're hearing he's doing well. We're happy to hear he's doing well. At the end of the day, we don't know how he's going to do. When he took time away, he had 2 goals in the entire season last year before taking some time off. So we don't know how he's going to bounce back. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, the Canadiens need him to take not 1, but at least 2 steps forward, because he probably took 2 steps back last year in the regular season. So he's got to take 2 steps forward at the very least, a very minimum. And then Danault is no longer a Montreal Canadien. He may have to take 3 steps forward. That's a question mark. Carey Price, coming off a knee surgery. Carey Price was not great in the regular season. He was fantastic in the playoffs, not great in the regular season. What kind of regular season does Carey Price have, especially coming off a knee surgery? These are all question marks. Would you like to add more?
I think they're very good question marks. Obviously, when you add new players to the lineup, you have to worry about chemistry. When you add, they added Savard to the defensive core. Will he find chemistry with Ben Sherratt? It's the most likely person he's going to be paired with.
Yeah.
And you just don't know. For obviously Sherrod and Shea Weber had chemistry. They read each other. They understood each other. They talked the same language. It was an unusual pairing. I don't think anybody expected those two to succeed together, but they did to a great extent. You're now changing the partner for Ben Sherrod with David Savard, and you're replacing a guy who did 25 minutes per game. Can David Savard replace 25 minutes of Shea Weber? That's a big unknown for me. And you'll probably see Jeff Petrie taking on a lot more minutes now. Is Alexander Romanov ready to take on close to 20 minutes as well? That's another significant question to be asked. So for me, the whole right-hand side of the defense, that is, has been kind of shook with the departure of Shea Weber. And the question mark is, can they absorb the lost minutes, or can they absorb the minutes that Shea Weber would play, which was usually an unusual amount per game?
Cherry River, hard seltzer, only 90 calories, natural flavors, and no preservatives. Now available in Quebec grocery stores and at the beer store. Hope everyone's having a nice summer. These are going down just great. Thank you very much. All right. Let's take a look at the Atlantic Division. I talked to you about Boston, Tampa Bay, Toronto, Florida, Montreal, Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit. I tell you this. Boston is making the playoffs. Tampa is making the playoffs. Toronto is making the playoffs. And Florida is making the playoffs. Agree or disagree?
Absolutely agreed. Montreal has the unfortunate, how do I put this? The unfortunate coincidence that they're in the toughest division in the league right now with the strongest teams. So relatively speaking, yes, those four teams are stronger than Montreal. And so, yes, those four teams are in. All
right. Do we agree that these four teams are in ahead of the Canadiens?
I would like to say that Montreal can probably rub elbows with Boston and potentially Florida in the standings, but Tampa and Toronto are untouchable.
All right. Okay. That's fair enough. Tampa and Toronto are untouchable. Montreal can... I got Florida ahead of Montreal. I might agree with you that they can probably give Boston a run, considering that Boston will be without Yaroslav Halak. Boston will be without David Krejci. Boston will be without Jeremy Lauzon, who got picked up by Seattle. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So three teams for sure are in. Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit. I have them all out. Agree or disagree?
I think Ottawa has the potential to surprise, so I don't want to discount them completely out of the picture. But Detroit and Buffalo, yes, and we can probably cross them off the list.
All right, so Ottawa's a maybe in your opinion. I think they're out. I still think they're too young and inexperienced, and I don't think they're ready, and I don't think they're deep enough. But okay, they're out. Buffalo and Detroit are out. Metropolitan, Carolina, locked to make the playoffs. And I know they lost Dougie Hamilton, locked to make the playoffs.
Carolina, yeah. I mean, just to kind of go helicopter level here on the Metropolitan Division, it's a very hard division to call because I think a lot of these teams are very close. Maybe save New Jersey, who I do expect to be completely out of the picture. All the other teams are practically, I don't want to say interchangeable, but it's going to be a very close race in that division.
Carolina, I have them in. New York Islanders, I have them in. Islanders a lock, the way they're coached. And only going to get better, adding Zach Parise. Islanders, for me, a lock.
Islanders are definitely going to be kind of the I know I'm going to skip ahead of my answer here, but if you're trying to make the argument for wild card races here for Montreal, I think Islanders are going to be one of the teams they're going to be kind of competing against here.
Pittsburgh and Washington. I take a look at the offense that they have on the top two lines. I take a look at the experience. Of course, Pittsburgh with Crosby and Malkin. Of course, with the Washington Capitals with Backstrom and Ovechkin and John Carlson, and the list goes on and on. Kuznetsov remains a question mark. We don't know what's going to happen there. But I think there's too much offensive depth and too much experience, and I have Pittsburgh and Washington in the playoffs.
Yeah, those two teams are just perennial playoff teams. I can't see them being out.
All right. So personally, I have Boston, Tampa Bay, Toronto, and Florida in. I have Carolina, New York Islanders, Pittsburgh, and Washington in. And there's 8 teams. We haven't talked about Philly yet. We haven't talked about Columbus. You did talk about New Jersey and Rangers. I mean, I have those teams out. I think Philly could give it a run, though. I really think that they have the ability to bounce back because last year, if you recall, COVID hit their team, and then all of a sudden they had a condensed schedule, too many games in a short period of time, and they were never really able to rebound from that. But so you have who as locks again?
For me, for the Metropolitan, Islanders, Carolina, Washington, Pittsburgh, and I had Philly a question mark against them as well. So we're pretty much in agreement. I think we've identified the strengths and kind of the teams that are going to give Montreal a run for the money the Metropolitan going to give them a run for the money, and the kind of teams that Montreal's going to be looking on the inside out to compete for the wild card spot.
Let's just say worst case scenario. We take a step back with what's going on and all that stuff and the situation that we know with the pandemic gets out of hand again. And they got to go back to the divisions that they had this past season. They go to the Scotia North. Mm-hmm. 4 teams made the playoffs last year: Toronto, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Montreal. And Montreal made them 4 points ahead of Calgary. Let's just say they go back to those divisions. Do the Canadiens finish in the top 4 in the Scotia North and make the playoffs?
I think Calgary's going to rebound this year. I think Calgary's going to have a stronger year. Edmonton
full season under Darryl Sutter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Connor McDavid and Edmonton, like you can't discount them. They're just Connor McDavid is just a one-man wrecking crew. So to bet against him would be foolish. And then you got Toronto. Winnipeg for me is always a hard team to kind of figure out. I've never had a good grasp on what their potential is. But if they were to go back to the Canadian division, I think Montreal is still kind of hovering around the 3, 4, 5 spot. So, the kind of the maybe in kind of result.
Power play, once again, could be better for the Canadiens. I think the power play will be better. Not could be better. The power play will be better. With minus Weber, but with Caulfield and with Hoffman and with Perreault that I think you'll see on the power play every now and then. I say the power play gets better. I say the penalty kill drops. I say they're probably going to give up more goals, or they will give up more goals because Phil Deneau is not going to be there, and he's gone, and he's with the Los Angeles Kings, and Shea Weber is going to be out for at least a season. Carey Price is coming off of knee surgery, so the penalty kill is going to get worse. They're going to end up giving up more goals. Paul Byron is not going to be able to start the season. Jonathan Drouin is the question mark once again. Kotkaniemi has to take 2 to 3 steps forward. David Savard, with all due respect to him, and everyone likes him, he is not Shea Weber. Carey Price, we don't know his ability. Jake Allen had a great season. He's going to have an equally great season. Tyler Toffoli had a great season. He's going to have an equally great season. Mike Hoffman's coming in. We don't know how he's going to fit in this team and how he's going to gel and what kind of chemistry. For all the reasons that I tell you, and we talked about it, the Montreal Canadiens as is, Andrew, I believe right now the Canadiens are not as solid as they were, the team that finished the Stanley Cup final. And based on what I see today, the roster today, I don't have this team in the playoffs.
That's fair. For me, Montreal is this team that's kind of hovering in the, they have to overperform expectation in order to get into the playoffs versus other teams which are expected to get in. I don't know if it's a question of being overly harsh on the Canadiens or we just refuse to accept the talent that's there. But given the relative strength of the teams that they're competing against and the known strength of those teams, I would agree that Montreal is kind of going to be competing at best for a wild card spot this year. And that's unfortunate given, the amount of roster construction that's gone into this team. But it is what it is. They are competing against the strongest teams in the league, I would say, for those playoff spots. So every single divisional game is going to be critical for Montreal. Every single game against the Islanders and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia is going to be critical for Montreal this year. They're going to have to overperform against those teams and get performance from the players that need to step up. If you have anyone that takes a step back, like if Jesperi Kotkaniemi takes a step back, or if Cole Caulfield has a sophomore slump, then these are the things that will greatly impact the success that Montreal can have this year.
As long as Marc Bergevin is the general manager, and as long as Carey Price is in Montreal, and so is Jeff Petrie, and so is Brendan Gallagher, Marc Bergevin has an obligation to put the best team on the ice, a team that can try and win right away for those guys. I mean, he signed Carey Price so Carey Price can try and win a Stanley Cup here. The same thing for Petrie and for Gallagher. And for those reasons, I say I don't think he's done. If you and I know that there is a question mark at center, if you and I know that this team is, at best, a wild card team, and I think right now they're out, if we know it, he knows it, I don't think he's done. I think Marc Bergevin goes out, tries to acquire a second-line centerman, and maybe tries to acquire a puck-moving defenseman, because everyone knows, looking at this team needs those things badly. A second-line centerman and a puck-moving defenseman.
You know, they had a puck-moving defenseman in a Victor Mete, but they decided not to exploit his skill set. I mean, there was a lot of kind of derisive and joke commentary about Victor Mete and where he fit on this team on social media, but he was the player, the one defenseman that was able to move the puck up the ice with little to no effort. But just there was a style clash between him and all the other defensemen and the kind of style of defense that Montreal wanted to play, and then therefore weren't able to exploit that skill set as much as Victor Mete was able to give. I think we're going to see Victor Mete have a tremendous year with Ottawa because they're going to let him kind of cut loose a little bit more. There's a lot of talk. It's a popular buzzword to say puck moving defenseman, but Montreal has to be serious about wanting to exploit that kind of skill set. And I didn't really see that, maybe because of a lack of resources. But Jeff Petrie does go up a bit, but they had a puck moving defenseman in Victor Mete, and they didn't use him. They didn't want to play that kind of risky hockey.
Yeah, but they got Chris Weidman on the right side in that mold in terms of a puck-moving defenseman. They probably think he's more of an everyday NHL defenseman than Victor Mete. They probably think he can produce more points. Now, there is a player who's out there, of course, that a lot of Montreal Canadiens fans would like to see, and that is Vince Dunn, who was picked up by Seattle Kraken, of course. He is a left-handed defenseman, and if you go out and you get a guy like that, you probably have to trade away one of your left-handed defensemen. And we know the Canadiens organization has already said that the makeup of the defense, the makeup of the blue line that got them to the Stanley Cup final, they want to kind of try and keep that same makeup. So at that point, that leads you to believe that Edmondson will be with Petrie, Sherratt will be with David Savard, and nothing will change there. We'll continue to monitor the situation. You can place your bets on MyBookie. Go to mybookie.ag/The Sick Podcast and use code SickPicks for a 50% deposit bonus. Bet, win, get paid. You can bet on who's going to make the playoffs next year, who's going to win the Stanley Cup, who's going to win the division, who's going to win the conference, those bets and much more. He is Andrew Zadarnowski of Habs Eyes on the Prize. I'm Marinaro. It's a Sick Podcast. You can listen to us on iHeartRadio app and follow us on all social media platforms. Thanks for tuning in and watching, everyone. Have a good one. It's a Sick Podcast.